Now, last week, the U.S. government, under the direction of President Donald Trump, indicted Julian Assange under the Espionage Act for what they call conspiring to leak classified documents. Now, this is according to The Intercept. The indictment focused on Assange's alleged efforts to encourage former Army intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning to leak classified materials to him and WikiLeaks about a decade ago. So now, to be clear, this has got nothing to do with Russia. It's got nothing to do with the 2016 election, obviously, and everything to do with things like the collateral murder tape, which basically showed American forces killing unarmed Iraqis, journalists, and medical professionals in what should have been classified as a war crime, and and something where they should have actually punished the people that were involved in the shooting, in the killings. Instead, it was Chelsea Manning that was punished for leaking this to Assange and to WikiLeaks after she had attempted to first run it up the chain of command, which got basically they didn't care, and then tried to run it to other outlets before WikiLeaks had taken it on. Now, remember, this whole thing, by the way, happened under the Obama administration, going after Chelsea Manning. And so this was an embarrassment of the government. So President Obama tried to go after it, but there were limits to what he was willing to do. He actually refused to target WikiLeaks and use the Espionage Act against Assange. Now, the reason that he held off is, look, here's, I basically don't want to do that because it kind of opens the door, right? We do have to consider press freedom. Now, WikiLeaks is considered a publisher of information, and therefore you can't actually go after the publisher after the press. That would be a violation of the First Amendment. Trump, however, now that we have President Trump doesn't care about press freedom. He hates the press. And then, when given a chance, he basically was able to revive the Obama investigation into WikiLeaks and is moving forward with that indictment to go after WikiLeaks and Julian Assange for basically embarrassing the Obama government. Although, of course, we know it's not really about that. It is about the hatred of the press. Now, WikiLeaks, of course, to refresh you guys, released a trove of documents, some of which were reported on by outlets like the New York Times and The Guardian, who also published some of them as well. Now, The Intercept, from which I'm citing a lot of this information, also published some of these documents. Now, they report that the Manning leaks helped reveal long-hidden truths about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and about the global war on terror, of which, look, you ask a lot of people how many countries were actually in fighting against so-called terrorism, they would be maybe say, okay, Iraq, Afghanistan, but it turns out, no, we're in Yemen, we're in parts of Africa, we're in a lot of places where we shouldn't actually be. There's no formal declarations of war, and we're just butting into other places and saying, oh, no, we're just here to fight terrorism, when that's not necessarily the case. So, now publishing that stuff, the collateral murder tape and et cetera, and not only that, but a lot of the ways that the U.S. government was found to have spied on us, that was from Edward Snowden, who was a former NSA contractor. That's important stuff, and that's really in the public interest of the American people. None of the released information revealed troop movements or anything that would actually put regular, or not just regular people, but troops in danger. So no American lives are in danger because of this. WikiLeaks and Snowden and all them made sure that the information that was released didn't actually harm American soldiers, right? What happened is basically they helped unmask what the military was actually doing in our name, and it was abhorrent. Now, were they really fighting terror by killing unarmed civilians and journalists and medical professionals in so-called double taps? No. They were, I think, in my opinion, inciting more terror. And so this is the most important foreign policy discussion in modern times, which makes the release of these documents an act of journalism that is incredibly important. And as noted journalist James Risen also pointed out in this article, Quote, WikiLeaks would obtain materials from sources inside governments and other organizations and then disseminate them, either by publishing them itself or by sharing them with major news organizations. WikiLeaks had served as an intermediary between sources and reporters. Now, that is a super important role. You want to have a publisher of information that protects its sources. And so, because if you give up names of your sources, then you're not going to have any sources. And that's with the government, unfortunately, wanting to know who these sources are in order to punish them as leakers, which in reality, they're actually whistleblowers. But see, as I said before, that makes WikiLeaks a publisher, just like the New York Times, just like the Washington Post and others. And I know some of you who are watching will definitely not agree to that. Oh, no, they were helping the Russians in 2016. Look, all that aside, this is not talking about Russia. This is talking about these other really important releases from WikiLeaks that happened back, around 10 years ago. So we have to understand what we're talking about here, and we have to get frames and we have to give context here into what this is going after, because again, WikiLeaks helped, whether it be on purpose or inadvertently, Donald Trump during the 2016 election with the release of, and I think this release was important, of the emails. But nonetheless, even if it helped him, they're still going after him because they are a part of the press, and President Trump despises a free and open press. And that is the problem. The Trump administration, through its actions against Julian Assange, who was in this media ecosystem, would be considered a journalist, is attacking the First Amendment. And whether you or not you personally like Assange, it shouldn't really matter. Your opinion of Assange, my opinion of Assange as a person, doesn't really matter. As a publisher, WikiLeaks and those working in that organization should not be subject to the Espionage Act. That would basically mean that you were spying against the United States government. Now, as Ryzen also points out, the indictment is almost a textbook definition of the job a reporter covering national security at a major news organization would do. It says that Assange and WikiLeaks repeatedly sought, obtained, and disseminated information that the United States classified due to serious risk that unauthorized disclosure could harm the national security of the United States. In reality, of course, it embarrassed the government of the United States. The indictment also goes on to say that WikiLeaks' website explicitly solicited, censored, otherwise restricted, and until September 2010, classified materials. Well, yeah. The thing is that today, virtually every major news organization has a secure way to get that kind of information. So you could say, well, they solicited, censored, restricted, classified materials. Well, then you could put them in the same box as WikiLeaks and charge them with the Espionage Act. And unfortunately, that is what they want to do. Now, soliciting, again, anonymous leaks and making it easy for the sources to leak to these outlets to get that information out in the public sphere is common journalistic practice nowadays. Now they continue with the indictment. Assange personally and publicly promoted WikiLeaks to encourage those with access to protected information, including classified information, to provide it to WikiLeaks for public disclosure. Well, again, that's pretty much what everyone reporting in national security especially does. They get their sources, and they come out and they promote themselves, and they say, hey, if you've got a tip, if you've got something, if you've got, classified material that you think is in the public interest, well, then we would like to know about it so that we can look at it and we can report it. Again, if it's in the public interest, because they won't release things that will actually hurt or endanger American lives. And so they can't actually go and make that real case. Now, here's the other thing, right? And a lot of people might be wondering, but what's the difference then between what WikiLeaks does in releasing classified information and what current reporters do in national security and in other places? What's the difference? Well, it's because there are a lot of there are a lot of leaks that are sanctioned by the government. Oh, come on, Jeff. No. Really? Yes, the government leaks. How do you think they find out a lot of this stuff? No, the government will leak to a reporter, and then the reporter will report it. Now, the difference is that the leaks from Assange embarrass the United States government. Whereas, of course, there are other leaks that didn't embarrass the government, but actually helped in some way. Now, why would the government want certain leaks? Well, there are plenty of reasons. It could change public opinion on certain things, politics, etc. Sometimes leaks are even used as a weapon against others that have an unfavorable opinion or don't share the establishment narrative. There are all sorts of reasons that government officials will leak to reporters and have this end up in the press. But it's never to embarrass the establishment or the government. And that is the difference. And now that the Trump administration is setting a precedent, thanks to the already set precedent from the Obama administration, who opened that door, Trump can and will use this to attack the press. I mean, he calls them the failing fake news New York Times, the enemy of the people. Can you see Trump not using leaks to punish the New York Times, to charge them with the Espionage Act, or any reporter that reports on something that's unfavorable to the administration? Remember, Donald Trump is in charge. The CIA is a great example. You have Gina Haspel. She has run CIA black sites where they torture people. What if another report like that comes out after this indictment? Or would it even come out following this indictment? If it did, you might see these reporters getting hit with the Espionage Act for publishing that information. I mean, this has an effect which could effectively chill the press. And so that's why this is a problem. That's why this is a very dangerous precedent. You do not have to like Assange to see where this is heading. And you definitely don't have to like Assange to realize that this could be a huge problem and that maybe we need to protect press freedom, even if it means protecting someone that we might not necessarily like. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a patreon.com/TYTNation set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent, progressive media.